The silence of deep space was a deception. To Jace Arden, it had never felt empty. It felt like a held breath. The split second before a mag-rail cannon shattered the hull and vented the atmosphere into the void. Even now, sitting in the plush, overly pressurized guest cabin of the Terran Alliance diplomatic cruiser Aegis, Jace could hear the phantom echoes of the war. He adjusted the high collar of his dress uniform, the fabric stiff and scratching against his neck, and grimaced at his reflection in the dark observation port. He looked like a man wearing a costume. The diplomatic corps had scrubbed the oil and gunpowder from his skin, trimmed the ragged edges of his hair, and pressed him into a suit of charcoal and silver. But they could not wash the 1,000-yard stare out of his eyes. He was 34 years old, but the war had aged his soul by decades. For 10 years, humanity had traded fire with the Seraphine Empire in a conflict over border worlds that were little more than balls of ice and rock. Millions had died for coordinates on a star chart. And now, peace. Or at least, the promise of it. The Aegis shuddered as it dropped out of warp, the stars stretching from streaks of white fire back into pinpricks of light. Jace leaned forward, placing a hand against the cold transparency of the viewport. His orders were simple. Deliver the initial ratification codes for the Armistice Treaty. Survive the ceremonial reception. And do not, under any circumstances, start the shooting again. Whatever skepticism Jace held, and he held a cargo hold full of it, vanished for a heartbeat as the Seraphine throne world came into view. It was not a planet in the way Terra was a planet. It was a masterpiece of biological engineering orbiting a blue giant star that burned with a fierce, sapphire intensity. The world itself was shrouded in a nebula of purple and gold, a protective atmospheric shell that shimmered like oil on water. But it was the orbital defenses that made Jace's breath hitch in his throat. Terran ships were blocks of titanium and ceramic, brutalist wedges designed to deflect impact. The Seraphine fleet was alive. Colossal leviathans, grown rather than built, drifted in the high orbit. Their hulls were chitinous and iridescent, glowing with internal pulses of amber light. Tendrils of sensor arrays swept through the vacuum like the fins of deep-sea predators. They dwarfed the Aegis, moving with a fluid grace that defied the laws of inertia. Nestled amongst them were the nebula cities, vast habitats spun from diamond filament and gravity fields, glowing softly against the dark. And in the center of it all sat the Imperial Palace. It was a moon-sized construct of crystalline lattice, a geometric impossible structure that caught the light of the blue giant and refracted it into 1,000,000 piercing beams. It did not look like a seat of government. It looked like a weapon waiting to fire. Jace pulled away from the window, his heart hammering a rhythm that had nothing to do with diplomacy and everything to do with survival instinct. He picked up the datapad resting on the table, tapping the screen to bring up the dossier on the one person who held the fate of 2 civilizations in her hands. Empress Kaelira. The intelligence briefing was sparse on hard facts and heavy on terrifying rumors. The Terran media painted her as a monster, a cold-blooded tyrant who had ascended to the throne by purging her own siblings. The soldiers on the front lines whispered that she was a sorceress who could boil the blood in a human's veins with a thought. The image on the screen was a static capture from a long-range scan, grainy and indistinct. It showed a figure of striking, terrifying elegance. Her skin was rumored to be bioluminescent, shifting color with her moods. Her eyes were described as fractal patterns, devoid of whites or pupils, windows into a mind that processed reality differently than any human could. She was worshipped as a living deity, the sword of the seraphim. Jace tossed the pad onto the bed. He did not believe in gods. and he had killed enough monsters to know they usually bled just like everyone else. But as the Aegis began its docking maneuvers, guiding them toward the crystalline maw of the palace, Jace felt a cold bead of sweat slide down his spine. He was walking into the lion's den, armed with nothing but a piece of paper and a smile he did not feel. The docking bay was a cavern of singing light. The air smelled of ozone and crushed orchids, a thick, humid scent that stuck to the back of Jace's throat. He stepped off the shuttle, flanked by two Terranades who looked like they were about to faint, and was immediately assaulted by the alienness of the Seraphine court. There were no straight lines here. The architecture flowed like liquid mercury, walls curving into ceilings that arched into floors. Gravity felt suggestive rather than absolute. Jace felt lighter, his steps possessing a bounce that threw off his center of balance. A delegation of Seraphine courtiers awaited them. They were tall, slender beings, their humanoid frames enhanced with subtle biotechnological artistry. Some had skin that looked like polished obsidian, others shimmered with scales of pearl. Circuitry wove through their hair like jewelry, pulsing in time with their heartbeats. They watched the humans with eyes that were wide and unblinking, their expressions unreadable masks of polite curiosity. "Envoy Arden," a voice chimed, sounding like a bow drawn across a violin string. A Seraphine male, draped in robes that seemed to be made of flowing smoke, stepped forward. He bowed low, a fluid motion that looked boneless. "I am High Chamberlain Vexus. Her Imperial Majesty awaits your presentation." "Chamberlain," Jace replied, his voice sounding rough and gritty compared to the melodic tones of the alien. He kept his hands clasped behind his back to hide the tremor in his fingers. "The Terran Alliance is honored." They were led deeper into the palace, a journey that felt like navigating a dream. Corridors shifted as they walked, walls retracting to reveal hanging gardens where plants with glass leaves chimed in the artificial breeze. Waterfalls flowed upward, defying gravity, feeding into pools of glowing nectar. It was beautiful, undeniably so, but it was a beauty that felt predatory. Every surface was perfect, every sound harmonized. It made Jace ache for the dirty, chaotic streets of Earth. He sensed the eyes on him. The courtiers whispered behind their hands, their gazes dissecting his uniform, his scars, his posture. To them, he was a barbarian in a suit, a representative of the species that had dared to scratch the paint on their invincible ships. They reached the grand audience chamber, and the doors, slabs of translucent crystal 3 stories high, dissolved into mist to allow them entry. The room was vast enough to house a thunderstorm. The ceiling was a projection of the local star system, moving in real time. The floor was a mirrored surface that looked like a deep, black lake, and floating in the center of the room, suspended on a platform of anti-gravity discs, was the throne. And on the throne sat the Empress. Jace had prepared himself for the monster in the briefing. He had prepared himself for a tyrant. He was not prepared for the reality of Kaelira. She was not sitting, she was lounging, her posture one of absolute terrifying confidence. Her skin was a pale violet, luminous and soft, glowing with an inner light that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the room. She wore a gown of living fabric, a dark material that shifted and rippled like a shadow having a nightmare, clinging to a form that was undeniably feminine but radiated a power that made the air hum. But it was her face that stopped Jace in his tracks. It was sharp, angular, and devastatingly beautiful. Her hair was a cascade of white filaments that floated around her head as if she were underwater. And her eyes. The rumors were true. They were fractals. Swirling pools of amethyst and gold that seemed to rotate endlessly, drawing the viewer in, promising madness or enlightenment. She was looking at the data pad floating in front of her, ignoring the arrival of the delegation. The silence stretched, becoming heavy and awkward. The Chamberlain cleared his throat nervously. Jace stood rooted to the spot. He knew he should bow. He knew he should recite the greeting he had practiced 100 times in front of the mirror on the Aegis. But his brain had short-circuited. He was a soldier who had stared down tank barrels without blinking. Yet under the presence of this alien sovereign, he felt like a cadet on his first day. Slowly, lazily, Kaylira turned her head. The movement was smooth, predatory. Her fractal eyes locked onto Jace. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. She did not speak immediately. She simply looked at him. She looked at his boots, his stiff trousers, the medals on his chest, the scar running through his left eyebrow. It was an inspection, invasive and thorough. Then, the corner of her mouth quirked up. It was not a smile, it was a smirk, sharp enough to cut glass. "They make them quieter than I expected," she said. Her voice was not the melodic chime of her courtiers. It was deeper, richer, a contralto that vibrated in Jace's chest. She spoke perfect Terran standard, but with an accent that tasted of ancient things. Jace blinked, his mouth dry. "Your Majesty?" Kaylira leaned her chin on her hand, the living fabric of her sleeve rippling over her arm. "The humans. The report said you were loud, boisterous, yet you stand there like a statue." Her eyes narrowed slightly, dancing with amusement. "And you are staring, Envoy Arden." Jace felt the heat rush up his neck, burning his ears. He realized his mouth had been slightly open. He snapped it shut. "Apologies, Your Majesty. The architecture. It is overwhelming." "The architecture," she repeated, her tone dry. "Is that what you were looking at? My architecture?" A ripple of tittering laughter went through the gathered courtiers. Jace felt like he was back in basic training, being dressed down by a drill sergeant. He needed to recover the situation. He needed to show respect. "The Terran Alliance extends its hand in peace," Jace announced, his voice sounding too loud in the acoustics of the chamber. He stepped forward to execute the formal bow of state, a rigid bending at the waist that required precise balance. He forgot about the gravity, on Earth or on a ship with standard plating. The bow was simple, here, where the gravity was 0.8 of the Terran standard. Jace's center of mass shifted too fast. He bent forward, and his heels left the floor. Panic flared in his chest. He flailed, his arms windmilling in a desperate attempt to correct his trajectory. He floated forward, drifting inexorably toward a hovering ceremonial drone that was recording the event. The court gasped. Jace braced himself for the collision, the humiliation already burning his gut. He was going to crash into a camera drone in front of the ruler of the galaxy. The peace treaty was going to end because he could not keep his feet on the floor. Snap. The sound was crisp, echoing like a gunshot. Instantly, the gravity slammed back to Terran normal. Jace's feet hit the polished floor with a heavy thud, his knees bending to absorb the impact. He stumbled, catching himself just inches from the drone, which buzzed indignantly and zipped away. The room was dead silent. Jace straightened up, breathing hard, his heart slamming against his ribs. He looked up at the throne. Kaylira still had her hand raised, her fingers poised from the snap. She was looking at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated delight. The glowing fabric of her dress had shifted from a dark shadow to a brighter, amused indigo. "Gravity can be treacherous for the uninitiated," she said, her voice laced with mirth. "I thought I would save you the indignity of wrestling with my recording equipment. It would be a poor start to a peace treaty if the Terran envoy knocked himself unconscious on a drone." The courtiers laughed again, but this time it felt less malicious and more relieved. Kalira had turned a diplomatic disaster into a moment of benevolent control. She had saved him, but she had also demonstrated that the very laws of physics in this room obeyed her command. Jace straightened his jacket, regaining what little dignity he had left. He met her gaze, and for a second, he saw something behind the fractal swirling of her eyes. Not contempt, but curiosity. "I thank you for the assist, Your Majesty," Jace said, keeping his voice steady. "My space legs are not what they used to be." "Clearly," she murmured. She waved a hand, and the platform lowered, bringing her down to eye level, though she still hovered a foot above the ground. "Come, envoy, let us sit. My advisors are eager to tear apart your treaty, and I am eager to see if you have more spine than balance." The negotiation table was a slab of obsidian floating in the center of the room. Jay sat on one side, flanked by his pale aides. Kalira sat opposite him, her advisors arranging themselves like a defensive perimeter around her. As the talks began, the amusement vanished from Kalira's face, replaced by a mask of cold, sharp intelligence. She listened as Jace outlined the terms of the demilitarized zone, her fingers tapping a rhythmic pattern on the obsidian. Jace, however, was watching the room. His soldier's instinct, honed in the mud of a dozen worlds, was screaming at him. The danger here was not the Empress. It was the men and women standing behind her. He noticed a tall, scarred Seraphine admiral, Lord Varkas, if the dossier was right, whose hand hovered near his weapon whenever Jace spoke. He noticed a slight, wizened advisor in gray robes who kept whispering into his comms link, his eyes darting toward the exits. There was tension here. Not the tension of former enemies meeting, but the tension of a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap. "The Terran Alliance demands a buffer zone of 3 parsecs, Lord Varkas growled, his voice like grinding stones. "This is an insult. It effectively cedes control of the Ethelgard trade routes. It is a buffer for safety, Admiral," Jace countered, keeping his tone even. "To prevent accidental engagements. Unless you plan on engaging on purpose," Varkas snarled, stepping forward, but Kalira raised a single finger. The Admiral froze instantly, shrinking back as if struck. "The envoy makes a fair point, Varkas," Kalira said softly. "Accidents have cost us dearly." She looked at Jace, her head tilting to the side. "But 3 parsecs is aggressive. Arden. It suggests you do not trust us to keep our word." "Trust is built, Your Majesty," Jace said, meeting her fractal gaze. "It is not signed." The advisors stiffened. One did not speak to the Empress so bluntly, but Kalira did not look offended. The indigo glow of her dress deepened to a thoughtful violet. "Well said," she admitted. "We will recess for the cycle. The court is weary, and I find the air in here has become stale." She stood, the negotiation abruptly over. "Envoy Arden, attend me." It was not a question. Jace followed her, leaving his aides and the glaring advisors behind. She led him away from the main hall, through a series of smaller winding corridors that smelled of night-blooming jasmine. The grandeur of the public spaces gave way to something more intimate, quieter. They entered a chamber that was essentially a glass bubble protruding from the side of the palace. The blue giant star was set on the horizon, painting the room in hues of twilight azure. There were no guards here, no drones, just the 2 of them and the terrifying drop into the clouds below. Kalira moved to the edge of the glass, looking out at her empire. The living fabric of her gown settled around her, the bioluminescence of her skin casting soft shadows on the floor. "You are a soldier," she said, not turning around. "I can smell the ozone on you, yeah. You were not bred for court." "No, Your Majesty," Jace said, standing at a respectful distance. I was a heavy infantry commander, Sector 7. Kalira turned then, her expression unreadable. Sector 7, the meat grinder, my generals called it. We lost 10,000 souls there. We lost 12,000, Jace replied quietly. And now you are here, wearing a suit that fits you poorly, talking of peace. She stepped closer, and Jace had to fight the urge to step back. She was tall, taller than him, and the energy radiating off her was palpable. Why? Why did they send a wolf to do a sheep's job? Because the sheep kept getting eaten, Jace said. The words slipped out before he could stop them, a flash of his old irreverence. He expected anger. Instead, Kalira threw her head back and laughed. It was a genuine sound, rich and throaty, devoid of the performative mockery of the throne room. A wolf indeed, she said, her eyes flashing. Tell me, Jace Arden, are you afraid of me? Yes, Jace answered honestly. Good, you should be. She began to circle him, her movements fluid. My court paints me as a goddess. Your media paints me as a butcher. Which do you see? Jace looked at her. He looked past the glowing skin and the impossible eyes. He saw the tension in her shoulders. He saw the way her hands clenched slightly when she mentioned the war. I see someone who is tired, Jace said softly. Kalira froze. The swirling fractals in her eyes slowed. For a moment, the alien majesty stripped away, leaving something raw and startled underneath. You are bold, human, she whispered, stepping into his personal space. She was close enough that he could feel the cold radiance of her skin. Dangerously bold. I have nothing left to lose, Your Majesty, Jace said, holding her gaze. The war took most of me. If I am here, I want to make sure it does not take the rest of them. Kalira studied him, her hunger evident. She looked at him not as a political obstacle, but as a puzzle she desperately wanted to solve. She reached out, her hand hovering inches from his chest, near the medals that marked his service. You expected a monster, she murmured. And I expected a bureaucrat. It seems we are both disappointed. I wouldn't say disappointed, Jace said, his voice dropping an octave. The air between them charged with static. It was magnetic, a pull that defied the logic of their species and their stations. Kalira's lips parted slightly, and for a second, Jace thought she might close the distance. The desire to touch her, to see if she felt like skin or energy, was sudden and overwhelming. Then she pulled back, the mask sliding back into place. The moment shattered, leaving them both breathless. Go to your quarters, envoy, she said, turning back to the window. Her voice was steady, but her dress was pulsing a rapid, erratic red. Rest. Tomorrow the sharks will be hungrier, and I cannot save you from gravity every time. Jace bowed, this time keeping his feet firmly planted, and retreated. He walked back to the guest wing in a daze. His mind was reeling, trying to reconcile the image of the tyrant with the woman who had laughed at his joke and looked at him with such intense, lonely curiosity. He reached his quarters, a lavish suite filled with alien silks and fruits he did not recognize. He loosened his collar, gasping for air, feeling like he had just run a marathon. He sat at the desk, intending to record a log for his superiors, but the terminal screen flickered before he touched it. It wasn't a standard boot sequence. The holographic emitter sparked, spitting out a distorted cloud of blue light. Jace stiffened, his hand instinctively going to the sidearm he was not allowed to carry. The hologram resolved into a fragmented, glitching image. It was a seraphine crest, but inverted, corrupted by lines of scrolling code that looked infectious. A voice, synthesized and broken, whispered from the speakers. Do not trust. Silence is a cage. The image warped, showing a flash of the throne room, then a flash of a neural schematic, a brain map that looked human, yet distinctly not. The mind that rules the throne does not rule itself, the voice hissed, filled with static and terror. Orion wakes. Run. Terran. Run while you can. The message dissolved into white noise, then vanished, leaving the terminal displaying the standard Seraphine hospitality greeting. Jace stared at the empty air, the cold sweat returning with a vengeance. He looked at the door, then back at the terminal. The peace was a lie. The conspiracy he had sensed in the throne room was not just about territory or trade routes. It was something deeper, something that reached into the mind of the Empress herself. Jace Arden had come here to sign a treaty, but as he looked out the window at the glowing, beautiful, terrifying palace, he realized he had just stepped onto a new battlefield. And this time, he had no idea who the enemy was. The second day of negotiations began with the subtle hostility of a loaded weapon. The Great Hall of Accords was bathed in the harsh, unfiltered light of the blue giant star, stripping away the romantic mystique of the previous evening and leaving only the cold, hard edges of political reality. Jace sat at the obsidian table, his back rigid, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of his datapad. Across from him, the Seraphine delegation had swollen in number. Lord Varkas was there again, his scaled armor polished to a mirror sheen, flanked by 3 other admirals who looked at Jace as if he were a particularly stubborn stain on the floor. Empress Kalyra sat on her floating throne at the head of the table. She wore a gown of severe metallic silver today, her bioluminescence dimmed to a cool, detached white. She looked untouchable, a statue carved from ice and starlight. But when her eyes met Jace's for a fleeting second, he saw a spark of recognition, a silent acknowledgement of the secret conversation they had shared the night before. "The Empire requires assurance," Varkas stated, his voice booming through the acoustic amplifiers of the hall. He slammed a holographic map onto the table. "The Terran fleet's patrols in the Orion Arm are a direct threat to our shipping lanes. We demand full telemetry access to all Alliance vessels within 10 parsecs of our border." Jace stared at the map. The demand was absurd. Giving the Seraphines real-time telemetry was tantamount to handing them the keys to the Terran defense grid. It was not a security provision, it was a prelude to invasion. "Denied," Jace said flatly. Varkas narrowed his eyes, his nostrils flaring. "You refuse a reasonable request for transparency." "I refuse a request for surrender, Admiral," Jace shot back. "Telemetry access allows you to track our shield frequencies and reactor outputs. If I agree to that, I might as well paint targets on our hulls for you." "Are you accusing the Empire of treachery?" Varkas hissed, leaning over the table. "I am accusing you of being a strategist," Jace said, not backing down. "You wouldn't ask for that data unless you plan to use it. If you want peace, we trade patrol schedules, not schematics. We verify. We don't expose." The court went silent. The other admirals murmured amongst themselves, their expressions dark. Humans were supposed to be desperate for this treaty. They were supposed to be bowing and scraping, grateful that the Seraphine war machine had stopped grinding them into dust. Jace Arden was not following the script. Kalyra watched him, her chin resting on her hand. The cool white of her skin warmed slightly, a faint flush of violet appearing at her throat. She was enjoying this. "The envoy is correct, Varkas," Kalyra said, her voice cutting through the tension like a razor. "We would never grant them such access to our own fleets. To demand it of them is theatrical, not practical." Varkas turned to her, his jaw tight. "Your Majesty, with respect, the humans are duplicitous by nature. We need leverage. We have leverage, Kalira said, her eyes flashing. We have the largest fleet in the galaxy. We do not need to peek through their keyholes to know we can crush them. Proceed to the trade tariffs. Varkas sat down, looking murderous. Jace let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He looked at Kalira, and she offered him the faintest, almost imperceptible nod. It was a small victory, but in this room, it felt monumental. The session dragged on for hours, a grueling slog through legalese and economic disputes. By the time the midday recess was called, Jace felt like he had gone 10 rounds with a heavy-gravity wrestler. He found Kalira waiting for him in a private alcove overlooking the suspended gardens. Her entourage momentarily dismissed save for 2 silent guards posted at the far end of the corridor. "You have a death wish, Arden," she said as he approached, though her tone was light. "Varkas has challenged people to duels for less than what you said to him today." "Varkas can get in line," Jace said, leaning against the railing. He tugged at the high collar of his dress uniform. "And if he wants to duel, he'll have to wait until I get out of this torture device." "Who designed this collar? An executioner?" Kalira smirked, gliding closer. "It is stiff. It makes you look like a frightened crustacean trying to hide in its shell." "I was going for dignified statesman," Jace countered. "But I suppose frightened crustacean works too. And you? Do you have a schedule for breathing, or is that spontaneous?" He gestured to the datapad one of her aides had left on a nearby pedestal, which was scrolling a minute-by-minute itinerary of her day. Kalira sighed, the sound uncharacteristically human. 0800, breathe. 0801, look imperious. 0802, breathe again. It is a grueling life. Envoy, my lungs are unionized. They demand strict breaks. Jace chuckled, the sound surprising him. It had been a long time since he had laughed without a bitter edge to it. "Well, you're doing a great job on the looking imperious part. Varkas looked ready to wet himself when you shut him down." "Varkas is a hammer," Kalira said, her gaze drifting out to the floating flora of the garden. "He sees every problem as a nail. He does not understand that peace is a tapestry, not a wall. You have to weave it, not build it." She looked back at him, her fractal eyes shimmering with a playful light. "And you, Jace? Are you a hammer?" "I used to be," Jace admitted. "Now I think I'm just the guy trying not to smash his thumb." They stood there for a moment, the silence comfortable, shared between 2 people who were tired of carrying the weight of their respective worlds. It was a dangerous rhythm they were falling into, a banter that felt too easy, too natural. Jace found himself wanting to make her laugh again, just to see the way her bioluminescence flared brighter when she was amused. "Come," Kalira said, pushing off the railing. "There is a ceremonial tour. I am required to show you the Helix Spire. It is technically a marvel of engineering, but mostly it is just very tall and very shiny. Try to look impressed." The Helix Spire was indeed very tall and very shiny. It was a twisting tower of transparent aluminum and gravity-suspended platforms that spiraled up through the heart of the palace, acting as a central hub for the anti-gravity generators that kept the massive structure stable. Jace walked beside Kalira, a discreet distance maintained for the sake of the cameras that hovered nearby. The entourage trailed behind them, a gaggle of whispering courtiers and watchful guards. "This generator core," Kalira explained, pointing to a massive rotating ring of light in the center of the shaft, "regulates the gravitational variance for the entire southern hemisphere of the palace. It is synchronized with the planetary rotation." "Impressive," Jace said, looking up at the dizzying array of floating walkways above them. "And if it fails?" "It does not fail," Kalira said with the confidence of someone who had never known a power outage. "The redundancy systems are..." The air suddenly screamed. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It was the sound of physics tearing apart. The hum of the generator spiked into a deafening shriek. The lights in the shaft turned from a soothing blue to a violent, strobing red. Jace's instincts took over before his brain even registered the threat. He saw the readings on a nearby console flash erratic, impossible numbers. He felt the floor lurch beneath him, the artificial gravity fluctuating wildly. Above them, a massive section of the crystalline walkway groaned and sheared off, plummeting straight toward where Kaylira stood. "Move!" Jace roared. He didn't think about protocol. He didn't think about the guards. He lunged, launching himself across the gap between them. He slammed into Kaylira, wrapping his arms around her waist and driving them both sideways. They hit the edge of the platform just as the debris crashed down behind them. The impact shattered the floor they were standing on. They fell. For a heartbeat, there was only wind and the terrifying vertigo of freefall. Then, the gravity fluctuated again, slamming them sideways. Jace grunted, twisting his body in midair to take the brunt of the impact. They crashed onto a lower maintenance balcony, skidding across the smooth metal surface. Debris rained down around them, shards of crystal, twisted metal, and sparks of raw energy. A chunk of masonry the size of a tank smashed into the wall a few feet away, showering them in dust. Jace covered Kaylira with his body, shielding her head with his arms. He could feel her heart hammering against his chest, rapid and terrified. She was clinging to his jacket, her fingers digging into the fabric. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of alarms and crashing structure. Then, as quickly as it had started, the collapse stopped. The generator whined down to a low, ominous thrum. Silence returned, broken only by the hiss of severed cables and their own ragged breathing. Jace lifted his head, wincing as a sharp pain shot through his shoulder. He looked down. Kaylira was staring up at him. Her face was inches from his. Her skin was flashing a chaotic storm of colors, white, red, violent violet. Her pupils were dilated wide, the fractals spinning so fast they were a blur. They were pressed together, legs tangled, hips flush. In the chaos of the crash, the political distance had vanished completely. Jace could feel the heat of her, the alien texture of her skin where his hand rested on her arm, smoother and cooler than a human's but undeniably alive. "Are you hurt?" Jace rasped, his voice raw. Kaylira didn't answer immediately. She seemed paralyzed, not by fear but by the sheer, sudden intimacy of the moment. She looked at his mouth, then up to his eyes. Her hand moved, almost involuntarily, coming up to rest over his heart. "No," she whispered. You are bleeding." Jace glanced at his shoulder. The dress uniform was torn, and blood was seeping through the fabric. "I'm fine. Just a scratch." He should have moved. He should have rolled off her, helped her up, and called for the guards. But he didn't. He couldn't. The adrenaline was fading into something else, a hyper-awareness of the woman beneath him. He could smell the scent of her, ozone and orchids, sharp and sweet. "You saved me," Kaylira said, her voice filled with wonder. "Why?" "Habit," Jace said, a breathless laugh escaping him. "Don't," she said, her grip on his chest tightening. "Don't make a joke of it." Her eyes searched his, looking for something she hadn't found in her court, in her advisors, in her entire empire, safety. For a second, just a second, the mask was gone entirely. She wasn't an Empress. She was just Kaylira, and he was just Jace. The gravity of the situation pressed them together, pinning them in a moment that felt stolen from time. Then, the sound of thrusters broke the spell. "Secure the perimeter. Medical team, move! Move!" Security drones swarmed down the shaft, followed by a squad of royal guards descending on gravity discs. Jace rolled off Kaylira, groaning as his bruised ribs protested. He offered her a hand, but her guards were already there, surrounding her, pushing Jace back with the butts of their energy rifles. "Secure the Terran!" a captain shouted. "Stand down!" Kaylira ordered, her voice regaining its command whip-crack instantly. She pushed her guards aside, standing tall despite the dust on her silver gown. "He saved my life. Anyone who touches him answers to me." The guards hesitated, lowering their weapons. Jace leaned against the railing, catching his breath. He looked up at the shattered walkway above. He saw the sparking remains of a control node. He recognized the burn pattern. It wasn't a malfunction. It was a shaped charge, a precise controlled demolition designed to look like a failure. He looked at Kaylira, catching her eye. He tapped his own temple, then pointed subtly at the wreckage. Sabotage. Kaylira's eyes narrowed. She understood. That night, Jace lay in a biobed in the guest wing's medical bay. The room was dark, lit only by the soft, rhythmic pulsing of the biogel patches on his shoulder and ribs. The pain was a dull throb now, muffled by seraphine analgesics that made his head feel like it was stuffed with cotton. The door hissed open. Jace tensed, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there but relaxed when he saw who it was. Kaylira slipped into the room. She was alone. She had shed the silver armor gown and was wearing a simple robe of dark blue silk, her hair loose and flowing around her shoulders. She looked smaller like this, less like a monument and more like a person. "You shouldn't be here," Jace said, sitting up slowly. The guards see what I tell them to see," Kaylira said quietly. She walked to the side of the bed, looking down at him. "How is the shoulder?" "It'll hold," Jace said. "Terran meat is tougher than it looks." Kaylira reached out, her fingers hovering over the biogel patch on his arm. She touched the edge of his skin, her fingertips cool and soothing. "You took the impact, the debris. It would have crushed me." "It was a shaped charge. Kaylira," Jace said, dropping the titles. "I saw the scorch marks. Someone blew that walkway." Kaylira's hand stilled. She didn't look surprised. She looked resigned. "I know. My security chief confirmed it. They found traces of a corrosive accelerant used in mining charges." "Inside the palace?" Jace asked. "That's an inside job, high level." "I know," she repeated, her voice brittle. She pulled a chair over and sat down, her posture slumping slightly. "They want me dead, Jace, or they want me afraid. I am not sure which is worse." "Who?" "My council, my family, the people who smile at me every morning." She looked at him, her eyes wide and vulnerable. "You told me you lost soldiers. How do you handle it? The betrayal? The knowledge that the people you lead might be the ones who kill you?" Jace looked at the ceiling. "You don't handle it. You just survive it. I lost my squad on Eridanus Foe. Friendly fire. Command called it an accident, but we knew it was a coordinate error from a drunk artillery officer miles behind the line. I wanted to kill him. I wanted to burn the whole HQ down." "But you didn't," Kaylira said. "No, because burning it down wouldn't bring my boys back. So I made a joke of it. I told everyone the artillery officer was just trying to keep us warm. We laughed, and because we laughed, we didn't break." Kaylira let out a soft, dry chuckle. "The first time I ordered an orbital strike, it was against a rebel province on the moon of Xylos. They were zealots, killing civilians. My advisors told me it was necessary. I gave the order. I watched the city turn into a crater from the bridge of my flagship." She looked at her hands. "I didn't eat for 3 days. I felt like a monster. And then Varkas told me, "Your Majesty, you have a steady hand." He meant it as a compliment. "Did you laugh?" Jace asked gently. "No. I vomited," she said. "But maybe I should have laughed. It might have kept the nightmares away." She looked up at him, and the rawness in her expression tore at Jace's heart. They were two soldiers comparing wounds in the dark, stripped of their flags and their uniforms. "You're not a monster, Kalira," Jace said. "Monsters don't vomit. They don't care." She shifted in her chair, leaning closer to the bed. The distance between them closed again. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the same electricity they had felt on the balcony, but deeper this time. Slower. Jace watched the light play across her collarbones. The bioluminescence was soft, a rhythmic pulsing of teal and blue that matched her breathing. It was mesmerizing. He traced the lines of it with his eyes, following the patterns as they dipped beneath the silk of her robe. It was alien. Yes, but the rise and fall of her chest, the slight tremble in her lower lip, that was human. That was universal. He didn't realize he was staring until Kalira shifted, tilting her head. "You are doing it again," she murmured, her voice dropping to a husky register that sent a shiver down Jace's spine. "Doing what?" Jace asked, his voice thick. "Looking at me," she said. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the edge of the mattress. Her face was inches from his. "Not at the Empress, at me." Jace couldn't look away. "It's hard not to." Kalira's lips curved into a smile that was equal parts amusement and invitation. Her eyes danced with a dangerous light. "Careful, human. If you keep staring like that, my court will assume I've already claimed you." "Maybe I wouldn't mind," Jace whispered, the words slipping out before his filter could catch them. Kalira's breath hitched. Her gaze dropped to his lips. The silence in the room was deafening, a precipice they were both standing on, leaning over the edge. Then, the world exploded. A siren blared, shattering the intimacy like a hammer through glass. The lights in the room slammed on, blindingly bright. The door hissed open, and this time, it wasn't a friendly visit. "Freeze! Step away from the Empress!" A squad of palace guard burst in, weapons raised. Behind them strode Lord Varkas, a datapad in his hand and a triumphant sneer on his face. "Secure him!" Varkas barked. Two guards grabbed Jace, hauling him out of the bed. He cried out as they wrenched his injured shoulder, slamming him against the wall. "What is the meaning of this?" Kalira stood up, her voice rising to a shout. "Release him immediately." "I cannot do that, Your Majesty," Varkas said, his voice dripping with faux regret. He held up the datapad. "We found the source of the sabotage. The command codes for the shaped charge were transmitted from this room, from the envoy's personal terminal." Jace stared at him, blood draining from his face. "That's a lie. I was with the Empress." "The transmission was set on a delay," Varkas said smoothly. "A classic Terran infiltration tactic. Destabilize the government, assassinate the sovereign, and blame it on internal strife. We have the logs, Your Majesty. He is a saboteur." Kalira looked from the datapad to Jace. Her face was pale, her mind racing. She knew it was a frame-up. She knew Varkas had planted it. But the evidence was there, public and damning. If she defended him now, without proof, she would look like she was conspiring with a terrorist. She would lose the court. She would lose the empire. She looked at Jace. Her eyes were burning with a fierce, helpless anger. She was trapped. "Jace Arden," Kalira said, her voice shaking with the effort of control. "You are hereby under arrest for high treason and attempted regicide." The guards cuffed Jace's hands behind his back. He didn't fight them. He looked at Kaylira. He didn't see a betrayal. He saw the trap closing around her too. "I didn't do it," Jace said, his voice calm amidst the chaos. "You know I didn't." "Take him away," Varkas ordered. As they dragged him out of the room, Jace looked back one last time. Kaylira stood alone in the center of the blindingly bright room, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her bioluminescence had turned a violent, stormy gray. She met his gaze, and in that split second, a silent message passed between them. It wasn't goodbye. It was a promise. "Wait for me." The door slid shut, severing the connection, and Jace was shoved down the corridor into the belly of a palace that had decided to swallow him whole. The prison cell did not have walls. Walls would have been a comfort. Walls implied geometry, stability, and a definitive end to the space one occupied. The containment unit Jace Arden had been thrown into possessed none of these things. It was a singularity trap, a localized distortion of gravity that folded space back onto itself. If he walked forward, the floor curved upward until he was walking on the ceiling, which was also the floor. If he reached out to touch the boundary, his hand simply looped back around to touch his own shoulder. It was like being trapped inside a mathematical error. Jace sat in the center of the distortion, or what his inner ear desperately tried to interpret as the center. His stomach rolled with a nausea that had nothing to do with the injuries from the collapse, and everything to do with the fact that his vision kept trying to process 4 dimensions in a 3-dimensional brain. He closed his eyes, grounding himself by the throb of his bruised shoulder. He had been framed. That much was obvious. The shaped charge, the fake logs, Varkas's convenient arrival. It was a textbook play, but the why nagged at him. If they just wanted to kill Kaylira, the falling walkway should have done it. Framing a Terran envoy was messy. It invited war, unless war was the point. "Terran," a voice whispered. Jace opened his eyes. The sound didn't come from a speaker. It seemed to vibrate through the gravity field itself, bleeding in from a neighboring cell. "Who's there?" Jace asked, his voice sounding flat and compressed in the warped air. "Doesn't matter," the voice rasped. It sounded seraphine, but old, brittle like dried leaves. "You are the one they blame for the fall, the one the Empress saved." "I didn't do it," Jace said. "We know," the voice hissed. "We know the patterns, the glitches in the light, the concord of minds. They are impatient." Jace stiffened. "The Concord? Who are they?" "The architects of the silence," the prisoner replied, their voice trembling with a mix of madness and terror. "They are building a net, Terran, a web of neurons and code. It reaches into the city. It reaches into the fleet. It reaches into the throne itself. The mind that rules does not rule itself." The phrase triggered a memory, the glitching message in his quarters. The mind that rules the throne does not rule itself. "How do you know this?" Jace demanded, leaning into the distortion. "I heard them," the voice whispered, fading now. "I was a technician on the neural grid. I saw the ghost code, the Orion protocol. It is waking up, and it is hungry." The connection severed as the gravity hummed louder, drowning out the whisper. Jace was left alone in the looping dark, the name Orion Protocol burning in his mind like a brand, high above the dungeon, in the apex of the crystalline spire. The council chamber was a shark tank. Empress Kaylira sat on the dais, her posture rigid. The room was circular, surrounded by the 12 most powerful individuals in the Seraphine Empire. Usually, they bowed. Today, they stood like wolves circling a wounded elk. "The evidence is irrefutable, Your Majesty," Lord Varkas bellowed, pointing a clawed finger at the holographic display of the falsified logs. "The Terran encrypted the signal. He tried to bury you under 10 tons of crystal. We must retaliate. The fleet is ready to jump to the Terran border within the hour. You will hold your position. Admiral, Kalira said, her voice ice-cold. We do not declare war based on a single data trail that appeared with suspicious convenience. Convenience? Counselor Varen stepped forward. He was a tall, elegant man with skin like polished marble and eyes that usually held a grandfatherly warmth. Today, they were hard. He had been Kalira's mentor since she was a child, the one voice she trusted above all others. Majesty, the Terran Alliance has been chafing at the peace talks. They sent an assassin disguised as a diplomat. To hesitate now is to show weakness. It invites further attacks. I looked him in the eye. Varen, Kalira said, gripping the arms of her throne. He saved my life. If he wanted me dead, he only had to let gravity do its work. Why tackle me out of the way only to be arrested? A failed calculation, Varen dismissed smoothly. Or a sudden loss of nerve. It does not matter. The people are frightened. They see their Empress attacked in her own home. You must give them justice. You must give them a head. I will not execute an innocent man to satisfy a mob. Kalira snapped, her bioluminescence flashing a warning crimson. He is not innocent, Varen shouted. The break in his composure was sudden and shocking. He realized it instantly, smoothing his robes. But the damage was done. He is a variable. Kalira, a variable we cannot control. Execute him tonight. Stabilize the sector. It is the only logical path. Kalira stared at him. Varen never shouted. Varen never pushed for blood without a philosophical debate first. He was rushing her. He was desperate to close the loop. A cold knot of suspicion tightened in her stomach. She looked around the room, at Varkas, hungry for war, at the other nobles, nodding in agreement with Varen. They weren't her advisors anymore. They were a wall closing in. I will consider the council's counsel, Kalira said, standing up. The prisoner remains in custody. No action is to be taken without my direct biometric authorization. Dismissed. She swept out of the room before they could argue, but she could feel their eyes on her back. They were not looking at their sovereign. They were looking at an obstacle. The dungeon was silent, save for the low, sickening thrum of the gravity generators. Jace was trying to sleep, or at least pass out, when the distortion field rippled. The warping effect vanished. The floor flattened. The walls snapped into existence, and the cell became just a room again. The door hissed open. Kalira stood there. She wore a dark, hooded cloak over a tactical flight suit, a stark contrast to the flowing gowns of the court. Her face was shadowed, her bioluminescence dimmed to near invisibility. She held a disruptor pistol in her hand, but it wasn't pointed at him. Jace stood up slowly, his shackles chiming. Here to finish the job yourself? Kalira entered the cell, the door sealing behind her. She lowered the hood. Her fractal eyes were chaotic, spinning with exhaustion and fear. If I wanted you dead, I would have let Varkas airlock you an hour ago. He has been begging for the privilege. Why didn't you? Jace asked. Because you saved me, she said, stepping closer. And because Varen is pushing too hard. He wants you gone before you can talk, before I can think. She looked at him, really looked at him, taking in the bruises on his face and the heavy mag cuffs on his wrists. Why did you do it, Jace? On the walkway. You knew the risks. You knew my guards would likely shoot you. Why save the enemy? Jace looked at her. He saw the crack in the armor. He saw the woman who had confessed to vomiting after her first orbital strike. Because you are not the enemy, Jace said quietly. And because you are not just a symbol to me anymore. Kalira froze. The air between them seemed to vanish. A symbol, she repeated, her voice hollow. That is all I have ever been. The sword of the seraphim, the Empress, the Avatar. She gestured vaguely at her own face. People look at me and they see a flag. They see power. They never see the person holding it. I know the feeling, Jace said, stepping forward until he was only a foot away. They look at me and see a uniform, a rank, a weapon to be pointed at the bad guys. When I came back from the war, people thanked me for my service, but they wouldn't look me in the eye. They were afraid of what I'd seen. They didn't want to know Jace Arden. They just wanted the soldier who kept them safe. Kalira looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with a sudden fierce sheen of tears she refused to shed. We are trapped, aren't we? Both of us, locked in cages made of other people's expectations? Maybe, Jace said. But cages have locks, and locks can be picked. Kalira let out a shaky breath, and for a moment, she leaned toward him. It was a subtle movement, a gravitation pull she couldn't seem to resist. Jace didn't pull away, pull. He wanted to reach out, to touch her face, to prove that she was real and not just a creature of light and rumor, but the shackles kept his hands bound. I cannot protect you here, Kalira whispered. The council has locked me out of the main security grid. They are taking control, piece by piece. If you stay, you die at dawn. And if you die, the war starts, and the conspiracy wins. So what's the plan? Jace asked. Do I get a lawyer? Kalira smirked, the expression sharp and dangerous. No. You get a pilot. She tapped a command into her wrist comp. I have ordered your transfer to a maximum security holding facility on the moon of Tantalus. The order is in the system. Varkas signed off on it because he thinks it is a prelude to execution. But we're not going to Tantalus, Jace guessed. No, Kalira said, turning to the door. We are taking a detour. The transfer was a chaotic blur. Kalira, using her override codes, dismissed the regular guards and escorted Jace herself, claiming she needed to interrogate him personally during the transport. It was a thin lie, one that wouldn't hold for more than 10 minutes. But 10 minutes was all they had. They didn't go to the main docking bays. They went down. Deep down. The service elevator rattled as it descended into the bowels of the palace, bypassing the royal hangars and stopping in a dusty, forgotten maintenance bay carved into the asteroid rock. Sitting in the center of the dark cavern was a ship. It wasn't one of the massive living leviathans of the fleet. It was small, black, and predatory. A needle of matte black composite material with swept forward wings and no markings. A Wraith-class courier, Jace said, whistling low. Fast, stealthy, illegal for civilians to own. It was a gift from my brother, Kalira said, moving toward the ramp. Before I had to exile him, he liked to smuggle things. I kept it fueled. Does it have weapons? It has speed, Kalira said, hitting the ramp release. Get in! As they strapped into the cockpit, Jace in the co-pilot seat, struggling with the harness due to his cuffs, the palace alarms began to scream. They figured it out, Jace noted dryly. Varen is quicker than I gave him credit for. Kalira muttered. Her fingers flew across the holographic console, waking the sleeping ship. The engines whined to life, a high-pitched scream that vibrated in Jace's teeth. Systems green, Kalira said. Hold on. The ship shot forward, blasting out of the magnetic containment field and into the vacuum of space, immediately. The sensors lit up with angry red dots. Drone swarm, Jace called out, reading the tactical display. 12 contacts. Intercept vectors locked. They're not trying to disable us. Kalira, they're firing to kill. Then we must be difficult to kill, Kalara said grimly. She threw the ship into a violent barrel roll, dodging a volley of plasma fire that scorched the space where they had been a second before. The G-force slammed Jace into his seat, the breath punched out of his lungs. "I need power to the rear deflectors," Kalara shouted over the roar of the engines. "The interface is on your right." "I'm a little tied up at the moment," Jace yelled, holding up his shackled wrists. "Improvise, soldier!" Jace cursed and leaned forward, slamming his chin onto the tactile interface panel. He used his nose to toggle the energy distribution slider, swiping it from engines to shields. "Power rerouted," Jace shouted, wiping blood from his lip where he'd hit the console. The ship shuddered as a plasma bolt clipped their shields, but the reinforced barrier held. Kalara dove the ship toward the asteroid ring that surrounded the palace, weaving through the debris field with terrifying precision. Rocks the size of city blocks whipped past the canopy, missing them by meters. "You fly like a maniac," Jace yelled, watching a spinning asteroid fill the viewport before Kalara juked the ship sideways at the last second. "I fly like an Empress who does not wish to be vaporized," she retorted, her eyes narrowed in concentration. "If we survive this, I'm filing a formal complaint with your palace hospitality department." Jace grunted, slamming his shackled hands onto the secondary weapons console to trigger a chaff flare. "I will be sure to put it in the suggestion box," Kalara said, "right next to the execution orders." The drones were gaining. They were smaller, faster, and didn't care about self-preservation. "They're locking on for a coordinated volley," Jace warned. "We can't outrun that." "We are not outrunning them," Kalara said, her hand hovering over the hyperdrive lever. "We are leaving them. We're still in the gravity well. A jump now will tear the ship apart." "Only if the math is wrong," Kalara said, flashing him a wild, adrenaline-fueled grin. "Trust me." "Do I have a choice?" "No." She slammed the lever forward. The stars didn't streak. They exploded. The ship groaned, metal screaming against the stress of entering FTL while still fighting the planet's gravity. The universe turned inside out. Jace felt his stomach try to exit through his ears. And then, silence. The roaring engines dropped to a steady, hypnotic hum. The red dots vanished from the scope. The view outside settled into the swirling indigo tunnel of hyperspace. They were alive. Jace slumped back in his seat, gasping for air. Kalara let go of the controls, her hands trembling slightly. She leaned her head back against the headrest, closing her eyes. "We made it," she whispered. "We committed treason," Jace corrected, staring at the console. "You just kidnapped a foreign diplomat and fled your own capital under fire." "Technicalities," Kalara murmured, opening her eyes. She turned the pilot's chair to face him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a heavy, thick silence. They were alone, truly alone. No guards, no council, no court. Just a man in a torn uniform and an Empress in a flight suit, hurtling through the void in a stolen ship. Kalara unbuckled her harness and leaned over to him. "Give me your hands." Jace held out his wrists. Kalara produced a small laser cutter from a compartment under the console, with steady, precise movements. She sliced through the magnetic lock of the cuffs. The heavy metal clattered to the deck plating. Jace rubbed his wrists, the skin raw and red. "Thanks." Kalara didn't pull back. Her hands lingered on his forearms. Her fingers were cool, her skin humming with that faint bioelectric charge. She traced the line of a scar on his wrist, her touch feather-light. Jace froze. He could feel the pulse in her fingertips. He looked up, meeting her gaze. In the dim light of the cockpit, her eyes were vast, swirling nebulas of violet and gold. You are bleeding again, she said softly, looking at his split lip. Occupational hazard, Jace said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The air in the cockpit felt suddenly too small, too intimate. He could smell the ozone of her skin, see the dilation of her pupils. The rush of the escape was replaced by a different kind of acceleration. The sudden, terrifying realization that he wanted to kiss her, and that she might let him. Kalira seemed to realize it at the same moment. Her breath hitched. She pulled her hands back slowly, as if breaking a magnetic seal. We should check the supplies, she said, her voice slightly breathless. It will be a 3-day journey to the fringe. Right, Jace said, clearing his throat. Supplies, good idea. He stood up, wincing as his stiffness caught up with him. They moved to the small aft cabin, putting a safe distance between them. Kalira opened a storage locker and frowned. She pulled out a silver pouch. Nutrient gel, flavor, efficient. Efficient, Jace asked, leaning against the bulkhead. That's not a flavor, that's a threat. It contains all necessary amino acids and electrolytes. Kalira defended, tossing it to him. On Earth, we have this thing called taste, Jace said, catching the pouch. It's a radical concept. You usually put salt on it. Seraphine biology prioritizes fuel over recreation. She sniffed, pulling out another pouch. And there is only one sleep bunk. Jace looked at the narrow cot bolted to the wall. I'll take the floor. I've slept on worse. Once slept on a crate of grenades. Very lumpy, but high incentive not to toss and turn. Kalira looked at the bunk, then at the floor, then at him. A small smile played on her lips. There are no pillows. Of course not, Jace sighed, because pillows are inefficient. Exactly, she said, ripping open a nutrient pack and taking a grim sip. She grimaced. By the stars, this is awful. Give it here, Jace said, taking the pack from her. He rummaged in his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled packet of Terran spicy ration sauce he always kept on him. He tore it open and squeezed it into the gel. Try that. Kalira looked at it suspiciously, then took a sip. Her eyes widened. Her bioluminescence flared a bright, surprised orange. It burns. Why does it burn? That's the flavor, Jace grinned. It is aggressive, she decided, taking another sip. I like it. She sat on the edge of the bunk, and Jace sat on the floor opposite her, legs stretched out. The tension of the escape, the council, the conspiracy, it was all still there, looming in the dark, but for now, in the hum of the hyperdrive, it felt distant. Where are we going, Kalira? Jace asked quietly. Kalira lowered the pouch, her expression growing serious. There is a world on the fringe, Shadow's Port. It is an outlaw market orbiting a dying star. I went there once, in secret, with my brother before he died. If there is information to be found about the Concord, about who is ghosting the data in my palace, we will find it there. An empress in a hive of scum and villainy, Jace mused. You're going to stick out. I will wear a hood, she said. You glow, Kalira. Jace pointed out, gesturing to her skin. In the dark, you look like a distress beacon. She looked down at her hands, the soft blue light pulsing under the skin. Then I will need you to stand close, she said, looking up at him through her lashes. To block the light. Jace held her gaze, the playfulness fading into something warmer, heavier. I can do that, he said. Kalira smiled, a genuine, tired, beautiful smile. Get some sleep, Wolf. We have a long way to go. Jace leaned his head back against the metal wall, watching her as she curled up on the bunk. She didn't look like a deity anymore. She just looked like a woman on the run. And for the first time since the war ended, Jace didn't feel like a soldier. He felt like a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. Shadow's port was a scar on the face of the galaxy, orbiting a red giant star that was in the slow, violent process of dying. The station was a chaotic accretion of lashed-together hull plates, stolen docking rings, and neon-drenched spires that looked like they were held together by rust and prayer. It smelled of burning coolant, exotic spices, and the sweat of 1,000 different species. Jace guided the skiff into a narrow, shadowed berth that looked more like a trash compactor than a hangar. The moment the airlock hissed open, the noise of the station rushed in, a cacophony of shouting vendors, throbbing bass from distant clubs, and the mechanical grinding of illegal refits. Kalira stood at the top of the ramp, adjusting the hood of her nanofiber cloak. She had dimmed her bioluminescence as low as it would go, but she still hummed with a faint ethereal energy that made the air around her feel charged. To the casual observer, she was just another tall, dangerous figure in a place full of them. To Jace, she shone like a beacon in a coal mine. "Ready for your first taste of peasant life?" Jace asked, checking the charge on the plasma pistol he had scavenged from the ship's emergency locker. "Try not to look so regal. Slouch a little. Spit on the ground if you have to." Kalira gave him a look that could have frozen a supernova. "I do not spit, Jace, and I am perfectly capable of blending in. I have studied the sociology of the lower castes." "Studying it and smelling it are two different things," Jace muttered, leading the way down the ramp. "Stay close, and for the love of peace, don't try to reorient the gravity if someone bumps into you." They moved into the throng of the main concourse. It was a sensory assault. Towering four-armed vendors roasted unidentifiable meats on open grills. Cybernetic scavengers haggled over piles of severed droid limbs, and holographic dancers shimmied in the air above gambling dens, their light flickering through the haze of smoke. Kalira walked with a stiff, purposeful stride, her hand gripping Jace's arm tighter than she probably realized. She flinched when a passing drunk, a massive furred creature with 3 eyes, stumbled too close, belching a cloud of noxious gas. "Charming," Kalira whispered, her voice tight. "Is the floor sticky?" "I feel like the floor is sticky." "That is the least of your worries," Jace said, steering her around a puddle of leaking hydraulic fluid. "Keep your head down. The broker is 3 levels down, in the databanks." "You seem very comfortable here," Kalira noted, watching him navigate the crowd. "For a diplomat." "I wasn't always a diplomat," Jace reminded her. "And soldiers spend a lot of time in places like this. It's where you go to forget what you did, or to buy the things the army won't give you." They descended through the layers of the station, the air getting hotter and thicker with every level. The databanks were located in the station's cooling core, a maze of server towers and tangled cables where information was the only currency that mattered. They found the broker's stall tucked behind a wall of humming cooling fans. The sign above the door simply read, "Input, Output," in flickering Auribesh. Jace knocked, a rhythmic 3-tap signal. A slat in the door slid open, revealing a single mechanical eye that zoomed in and out with a soft whir. "We're closed," a synthesized voice rasped. "Come back when the star burns out." "I have credits," Jace said, holding up a credit chip he had pulled from the skiff's reserves. "And I have a query about the Orion Protocol." The mechanical eye froze. There was a long, heavy silence. Then, the sound of 6 different locks disengaging echoed through the metal door. It swung open. The broker was a spindly, arachnid-like cyborg suspended in a web of data cables, His organic parts were pale and withered, barely visible beneath layers of interface ports and sensory augmentations. He hung from the ceiling, his multiple limbs typing frantically on a spherical array of holographic screens. "Orion!" the broker hissed, spinning upside down to look at them. "That is a dead word, a ghost word. Asking it brings shadows." "We like shadows," Jace said, stepping inside and pulling Kaylira with him. "We need to know who is buying data on the palace security grid, specifically the gravity stabilization codes." The broker skittered down a cable, landing softly in front of them. He peered at Jace, then shifted his gaze to the hooded figure beside him. His mechanical eye whirred, cycling through spectrums, thermal, ultraviolet, bioelectric. The broker gasped, a wet, organic sound. He scrambled backward, knocking over a stack of memory drives. "Light," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Living light, the sword, the avatar." Jace stepped in front of Kaylira, his hand hovering near his pistol. "Eyes on me, data spinner." "You brought her here?" the broker squeaked, pointing a trembling metal claw at Kaylira. "Are you mad? The Conquered will burn this entire sector if they know she breathes." Kaylira stepped forward, lowering her hood. The sudden revelation of her face, glowing softly in the dim room, sucked the air out of the cramped space. She did not look frightened. She looked imperious, her fractal eyes pinning the broker to the wall. "If you know who I am," Kaylira said, her voice echoing with the authority of the throne, "then you know I can pay you. Or I can dismantle this station bolt by bolt until I find what I need. Choose." The broker swallowed hard. "Payment is irrelevant if I am dead, Majesty, but the Concord, they are bad for business. They want total control. No secrets, no black market. If they win, I am obsolete." He scurried back to his console, his limbs flying across the screens. "You asked about Orion. Orion is not a code. It is not a program. It is a mind." "An AI?" Jace asked. "Older," the broker said. "Ancient Seraphine tech. From the era of silence, it was designed to predict social unrest, to model rebellion before it happened. But the Concord. They woke it up. They fed it the neural patterns of the High Council." He tapped a key, and a holographic recording flickered into life in the center of the room. The image was grainy, taken from a hidden sensor, but the faces were unmistakable. It was a meeting of the Concord of Minds, and sitting at the head of the table was Counselor Varen. Kaylira's breath hitched. She took a half-step forward, her hand reaching out as if to touch the ghost of her mentor. "The Terran War is the catalyst," Varen's recording said, his voice calm and grandfatherly, the same voice that had taught Kaylira statecraft. "Fear makes the mind pliable. When the populace is terrified of extinction, they will accept the lattice. We will integrate Orion into the planetary grid, safety through unity. One mind, one empire." "They are not just watching," the broker whispered. "They are steering. The Orion protocol uses subliminal psionic frequencies. It nudges, it suggests, it alters the emotional weighting of decisions." The broker brought up another file. It was a medical scan, Kaylira's medical scan. "They have been dosing the throne room," the broker said. "Low-frequency neural entrainment, for cycles. They have been testing it on you, Majesty, pushing your aggression centers, damping your empathy." Kaylira staggered back as if she had been struck. Jace caught her arm, steadying her. That is impossible," she stammered, her skin flickering a chaotic, panicked gray. "My mind is my own. I am Seraphine. We are resistant to telepathy." "Resistance is not immunity," the broker said gently. "Did you ever feel a sudden rage you could not explain? A decision that felt right in the moment, but alien in retrospect. That was Orion. Kalira stared at the recording of Varen. The orbital strike on Xylos, she whispered, horror dawning in her eyes. I didn't want to do it. I remember feeling sick. And then, suddenly it felt clear. It felt necessary, like a math equation. That was the algorithm, the broker confirmed. They used you to clear the board. Kalira turned away, retching dryly. She pulled her arm from Jace's grip and stumbled toward the door, pushing past him into the corridor. Kalira, wait! Jace shouted. He threw a credit chip at the broker, 5,000 credits, more than enough to buy the man's silence, and ran after her. He found her 3 levels up, on a deserted observation deck overlooking the dying star. The red giant filled the viewport, a wall of churning, bloody fire. It cast long, harsh shadows across the deck, painting Kalira in shades of crimson and black. She was leaning against the rusted railing, her head bowed, her hands gripping the metal so hard the nano-weave of her gloves was tearing. She wasn't crying. She was vibrating. Her bioluminescence was erratic, flashing in jagged staccato bursts. Kalira, Jace said softly, approaching her slowly, as one would approach a wounded animal. Don't, she rasped, not turning around. Don't come near me. You don't know who is in here. You don't know if it is me speaking or the machine. It's you, Jace said. I know it's you. How can you know? She spun around, her eyes wide and wild, the fractals spinning with dizzying speed. I don't even know, Varen. He raised me. He taught me how to think. If he has been feeding my mind to an AI since I was a child, then what am I? Am I an Empress? Or am I just a terminal with a crown? She paced the small deck, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. Every choice I made, every death I ordered, was it me? Or was I just a puppet dancing on a string of code? That anger I felt when Varkas challenged me, was that mine? Or did Orion dial it up to keep the military unstable? She slumped against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the dirty deck plating, her face buried in her hands. I am hollow. Jace, I am a shell. There is nothing inside but what they put there. The vulnerability in her voice broke Jace's heart. This wasn't the terrifying sovereign who commanded fleets. This was a woman whose entire reality had been stolen from her. He knelt in front of her. He didn't care about the grime on the floor or the radiation warnings on the glass. He reached out and gently took her hands, pulling them away from her face. Look at me, he commanded softly. Kalira looked up. Her skin was pale, the light dim and fading. A single tear leaked from her fractal eyes. It wasn't clear water. It was a drop of liquid phosphorescence, glowing a soft, sad blue. You are not a shell, Jace said, his voice hoarse with emotion. A machine doesn't tackle a diplomat out of the way of falling debris. A machine doesn't laugh at bad jokes about pillows. A machine doesn't risk treason to save one man. Maybe it was a glitch, she whispered. It wasn't a glitch, Jace said firmly. He reached up and cupped her face with his rough, scarred hands. His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, wiping away the glowing tear. The substance left a faint, luminous streak on his skin. It was you. The part of you they couldn't code out. The part that is real. Kalira leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. She let out a shuddering breath, and for the first time in hours, her bioluminescence stabilized. It turned a warm, steady gold. You are the only thing that feels real right now, she admitted, her voice barely audible. Everything else is smoke, but you are solid. They stayed like that for a long moment, the dying star burning behind them, the galaxy falling apart around them. Jace could feel the heat of her skin, the pulse of her alien biology beating in time with his own. The distance between them, politician and soldier, human and alien, had evaporated. Kalira opened her eyes. The fractals had stopped spinning. They were deep, endless pools of gold. She looked at Jace's mouth, then at his eyes, searching for something. "I have wanted to touch you since the moment you tripped in my throne room," she confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I have been fighting it, telling myself it was just curiosity or political maneuvering." "And now?" Jace asked, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Now I am tired of fighting," she whispered. She shifted her hands, moving them from his grasp to rest on his temples. Her fingers were cool, but they burned where they touched his skin. "In my culture," Kalira said, her voice taking on a strange, resonant quality, "we do not just speak. Words are clumsy. They can be twisted. Lies can be hidden in syntax, but feeling cannot be faked." She leaned her forehead against his. "I want to show you. I want to show you that I am real. Will you let me?" "How?" Jace breathed. "A neural channel," she said. "It is usually reserved for life bonds, for deep family. It opens the walls between minds. Just a crack, just enough to feel." Jace didn't hesitate. He trusted her, with his life, and now, with his mind. "Do it." Kalira closed her eyes and Jace felt a sudden, strange pressure in the center of his skull. It wasn't painful. It felt like the moment before a sneeze, a building tension, and then the dam broke. Sensation. It wasn't words. It wasn't pictures. It was a flood of raw, unfiltered emotion pouring into him. He felt cold, a vast icy solitude that stretched for light years. The loneliness of the throne, the crushing weight of 1,000,000,000 lives resting on her shoulders. He felt the armor she wore around her heart, the constant, exhausting vigilance. But beneath the ice, he felt heat, a fierce, jagged joy. It was the memory of him arguing with her, the thrill of being challenged, the delight of his insolence. She didn't want a worshiper, she wanted an equal, and deeper still, he felt hunger. It was a terrifying, beautiful pull, a desperate need to be known, to be seen, to be held. It was a desire for him that was so intense it made his knees weak. In return, Jace's own defenses shattered. He knew she could feel him too. She felt his guilt, the ghosts of the soldiers he had lost, the survivor's guilt that ate at his gut every morning. She felt his fear, not of war, but of insignificance. The fear that he was just a broken tool with no war left to fight. And she felt his longing. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't looking. The awe. The attraction that went beyond biology and into something spiritual. He wanted her. He wanted to protect her, and he wanted to burn the galaxy down if it meant keeping her safe. The intensity of the connection was overwhelming. It was too much. It was like staring directly into the sun. Jace gasped, instinctively pulling back. He scrambled backward on the deck plating, his chest heaving, his mind reeling from the sudden intrusion of another soul. "Jace?" Kalira whispered, opening her eyes. Jace stared at her. She looked different now. Brighter. He could feel the echo of her emotions still humming in his blood. It was terrifying. It was the most intimate thing he had ever experienced. Far more exposing than any physical act. He trembled, his hands shaking as he held them up, as if to ward off the light. I can't." That was... Kalira watched him. She didn't move to close the distance. She stayed where she was, bathed in the red light of the star, looking at him with a mixture of vulnerability and ancient, playful power. She saw his fear. She saw his hesitation, but she also saw the truth he couldn't hide anymore. Slowly, a smile spread across her face. It wasn't the polite smile of a diplomat. It was the wicked, teasing smirk of the woman who had saved him from gravity. It was a smile that hid a hunger just as desperate as his own. She leaned forward, just an inch, her voice dropping to a purr that vibrated in his very bones. "Stop staring," the alien Empress teased, then smirked. "Don't just look, you can touch it too." The line hung in the air between them. It was a challenge. It was an invitation. It was a dare. Don't just look. She wasn't talking about her body. She was talking about her soul. She was daring him to step back into the fire, to accept the connection, to stop standing on the edge of the cliff and just jump. Jace looked at her. He looked at the woman who was terrifying and beautiful and utterly, heartbreakingly alone. He realized that his fear wasn't about her being alien. It was about him being worthy. But he could feel her inviting him back in. She wasn't asking for a hero. She was asking for Jace. He took a breath. He didn't move his body. He didn't reach out with his hands, but instead, he reached out with his mind. He found the fraying edge of the neural channel she had left open, the door standing ajar, and he kicked it wide open. Yes. The word wasn't spoken. It was felt. He pushed his acceptance down the bond, a wave of warmth and surrender. He let down the last of his walls. He let her feel the depth of his desire, the absolute, unshakable loyalty that had formed in the last 48 hours. Kalira gasped as the connection snapped back into place, stronger this time. Her eyes flared with brilliant, blinding gold. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The sensation of their minds fusing was a climax of its own, a soaring, dizzying rush of shared existence. For a timeless moment, there was no Jace, no Kalira. There was only us. They sat there in the red twilight, breathing in sync, two broken people who had found the missing pieces of themselves in the wreckage of each other. Slowly, gradually. The intensity dialed back to a manageable hum. They remained connected, a low-level background noise of shared presence. It was comforting. It was an anchor. Jace wiped sweat from his forehead, letting out a long, shaky laugh. "Okay. That beats a handshake." Kalira chuckled, the sound rich and warm in his mind as well as his ears. "I told you. We Seraphines value efficiency." She stood up, offering him a hand. Jace took it, pulling himself up. He didn't let go. "The Orion Protocol," Kalira said, her voice steady now, filled with a new, cold resolve. "It is in the foundation of the palace, deep in the substrate. That is where the core is." "Then that's where we go," Jace said. "We have to shut it down, physically." "The Concord will be waiting," Kalira warned. "Varen knows me. He knows how I think. Or, he thinks he does." She looked at Jace, squeezing his hand. "But he doesn't know us," she said. "He is calculating for one mind. He is not calculating for two." "Then let's go prove him wrong," Jace said, checking his pistol. "Let's go break some hardware." They turned away from the dying star and walked back toward the shadows. Hand in hand, a two-person army marching to reclaim a throne. The slipstream between stars was usually a place of silence. But inside the cockpit of the stolen Wraith skiff, the silence was heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. Jace Arden watched the navigational array flicker as they dropped out of the illegal hyperspace lane, a smuggler's route known as the Needle's Eye. It dumped them into real space on the far jagged edge of the Seraphine home system, hidden behind the magnetic interference of the outer gas giants. Kalira sat in the pilot's seat, her hands moving with fluid precision across the controls. She looked different now. The imperial polish was gone, replaced by a grim tactical focus. Her bioluminescence was dimmed to a faint, stealthy gray, but through their open neural bond, a hum of shared existence that sat at the back of Jace's mind like a second heartbeat. He could feel the storm raging inside her. She was terrified, not for herself, but for her people. "We are clear of the perimeter sensors," Kalira said, her voice tight. "I have signal lock on the Loyalist frequency. General Torian. He commanded my father's guard. If anyone has resisted the mind net, it is him." "Is he trustworthy?" Jace asked, checking the charge on his stolen plasma pistol. "He is stubborn," Kalira replied, "which in this case is a form of loyalty." She keyed the transmission, using a quantum encryption key that predated the current administration. The response was immediate, a burst of static followed by a gruff, incredulous voice. When Kalira spoke, identifying herself not by her title but by a childhood code name, the relief on the other end was palpable enough to bleed through the speakers. Torian gave them the coordinates, a decommissioned waste processing airlock in the lower districts of the capital city. It was unglamorous, smelly, and perfect. As they descended toward the throne world, the view from the canopy made Jace's stomach turn. The planet was glowing, not with the usual soft luminescence of the cities, but with harsh, strobing lights. Holographic banners the size of continents were projected into the atmosphere. "What is that?" Jace asked, pointing to a massive projection floating above the northern hemisphere. It was Kalira's face, but it wasn't the Kalira sitting next to him. It was a stylized, sanitized version of her, eyes glowing with a holy white light, hands raised in benediction. "It is an ascension festival," Kalira whispered, the words tasting like ash. "They have declared me dead, or rather, ascended. They claim I have shed my physical form to become one with the stars." "And while everyone is looking up at the pretty lights," Jace muttered, "Varen is tightening the noose down below." They ditched the skiff in a subterranean hangar that smelled of ozone and rotting biomatter. General Torian met them there, a massive seraphine with scars crossing his scaled face and eyes that looked tired but clear. He knelt the moment Kalira stepped off the ramp, but she pulled him up, gripping his forearm in a warrior's shake. "We have no time for ceremony, Torian," she said. "What is the status?" "It is bad, Majesty," Torian rumbled. "Varen has been named regent. He claims the Terran Alliance assassinated you. He is broadcasting footage of Terran fleets gathering at the border. It is fake, of course. But the people, they are angry. They are scared. The recruitment centers are overflowing." "He is using grief to fuel the war machine," Jace said. "He is using everything," Torian corrected, eyeing Jace with suspicion before looking back to his Empress. "The mood in the streets, it is strange, manic. People are laughing one moment and screaming for blood the next. It is like the air itself is drugged." "It is not the air," Kalira said grimly. "It is the Orion Protocol. We have to get inside the palace." "The main gates are sealed," Torian warned. "The Royal Guard is under the direct command of the Concord." "We are not going through the gates," Kalira said, pulling her hood up. "We are going through the party." The capital city was a riot of sound and light. The Ascension Festival was in full swing, a grotesque celebration of a lie. The streets were packed with millions of citizens wearing white mourning robes that shimmered with holographic prayers. Anti-gravity floats drifted overhead, showering the crowds with petals made of hard light. Jace and Kalira moved through the crush, disguised in heavy cloaks Torian had provided. To the casual observer, they were just two more pilgrims lost in the revelry. Beneath the hood, Jace watched the faces of the Seraphines. He saw a young couple laughing as they shared a bottle of nectar wine, their fingers intertwined. He saw a father lifting his child onto his shoulders to see the parade. They looked normal. They looked alive. But then he looked up. Giant screens dominated the skyline, interrupting the festive imagery with flashes of Terran aggression, brutal, doctored clips of human soldiers burning Seraphine temples. Whenever the screens flashed, the crowd didn't just react, they convulsed. The laughter died instantly, replaced by a collective synchronized snarl of rage. It was unnatural. It was a switch being flipped. "You see it?" Kalira's voice was a whisper in his ear. But he felt her horror through the bond. They are not choosing that anger. It is being pushed into them. "It's fear," Jace murmured, pulling her closer as a group of chanting zealots marched past. "Terrans do it too, Kalira. We don't use a mind net, but we use the same tools. We tell people the enemy is coming to take their homes, their freedom. We scare them until they stop thinking and start obeying. Varen just automated the process." "It makes me sick," she hissed. "I thought I was protecting them. All these years, I thought my rule was benevolent. But I was just the pretty face on the cage." They slipped away from the main thoroughfare, guided by Kalira's memory of the city's underbelly. They navigated service tunnels and drainage outflows until they reached the foundations of the palace itself. This deep down, the crystalline lattice of the structure gave way to ancient, dark stone. This was the old palace, the original fortress built before the Seraphines had mastered the stars. "There is an entrance here," Kalira said, tracing her hand over a blank wall of obsidian. "The shrine of the first pact. Only the bloodline knows the frequency to open it." She pressed her palm against the stone and hummed a low, resonant note. The stone shivered and dissolved into mist. They stepped inside. The air was stale, dry, and cold. The roar of the festival above was gone, replaced by a tomb-like silence. The room was circular, dominated by a single towering monolith covered in glowing glyphs. Kalira approached the monolith. She looked small, standing before the history of her ancestors. As she read the glyphs, her shoulders slumped. "I was right," she whispered. "Orion was not a weapon, not at first." "What was it?" Jace asked, standing guard by the entrance, though he knew they were alone. "A shield," Kalira said, her voice trembling. "It was built after the Great Civil War. My ancestors, they saw how close we came to extinction. They were terrified of their own nature. They believed that free will inevitably led to conflict, so they built Orion to be a guardian mind, a system to smooth out the jagged edges of emotion, to nudge us toward harmony." She turned to look at Jace, her face pale in the dim light. "They chose safety over freedom. Jace, they were so afraid of pain that they decided to lobotomize the entire species just enough to keep them polite. And I am the heir to that cowardice." "You didn't build it, Kalira," Jace said firmly. "No, but I benefited from it," she cried out, the sound echoing off the stone walls. "How many times did the court agree with me too easily? How many times did a riot end before it began? I thought I was a good ruler. I thought they loved me, but they were just programmed to comply." She paced the room, her cloak billowing around her. "I cannot go back up there, Jace. I cannot rule them. The throne is poisoned. So what, you quit?" Jace stepped into her path, grabbing her by the shoulders. "You leave them to Varen? He won't just nudge them. Kalira, he's going to drive them off a cliff." "I should destroy the throne," she said, her eyes wild. "I should burn it all down." "And then what?" Jace challenged. "Chaos? Civil war? That's just another kind of failure. You have to offer them something better." "Like what?" she demanded, pulling away from him. "What is better than safety?" "Choice," Jace shouted. The choice to be messy, the choice to be wrong, the choice to hate you or love you because they actually feel it, not because a machine told them to. Kalara stopped. She looked at him, her chest heaving. The neural bond flared between them, a tangled knot of frustration and fierce, desperate affection. You speak of choice, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. But look at where your choices got you. Look at your scars, Jace. Look at your nightmares. You want that for my people? Yes, Jace said without hesitation. Because the alternative is being a pet. I would rather have the nightmares than the false dream. Kalara shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I cannot let you get hurt again. I cannot let them get hurt. Jace, if we go up there, if we break Orion, the backlash could kill you. It could kill me. I want to protect you. That is my choice. That's not protection, Jace said, stepping close again, invading her space, forcing her to look at him. That's control. You're doing the same thing your ancestors did. You're trying to curate the outcome because you're scared of the risk. He took her hand, placing it over his heart. I am not a civilian, Kalara. I am not a subject. I am a partner. You don't get to decide what risks I take. You don't get to wrap me in cotton and keep me on a shelf. I just want you to live, she whispered, her voice cracking. I am living, Jace said. For the first time in 10 years, I am actually alive because of you. But if you try to manage me, if you try to save me by shutting me out, then we've already lost. He looked deep into her fractal eyes. You asked me once if I was afraid of you. I'm not. But I am terrified of you trying to fix me. I don't need fixing. I need you to trust me. Kalara stared at him. She felt the truth of his words vibrating through the bond. She felt his stubbornness, his courage, and beneath it all, a love so vast and terrifying it made her knees weak. He wasn't hiding behind self-sacrifice. He was standing in the line of fire because that was where he wanted to be, standing next to her. The tension broke. Kalara let out a sob and collapsed against him, burying her face in the crook of his neck. Jace wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight, anchoring her against the shaking of her own body. I am sorry, she mumbled into his coat. I am so used to being the only one holding the sky up. You have 2 hands now, Jace murmured, kissing the top of her head. Let me help carry it. They stood there in the dark of the shrine, the ancient monolith bearing witness to a new kind of pact. It wasn't a promise of safety. It was a promise of solidarity. Whatever happened next, pain, war, death, they would face it with their eyes open, and they would face it together. Kalara pulled back, wiping her face. Her bioluminescence shifted from a frantic gray to a steady, burning gold. Okay, she said. We do it your way. We give them the truth, and then we brace for the impact. That's my Empress. Jace smiled, a crooked, dangerous grin. Now, how do we crash this party? The climax of the Ascension Festival was the Rite of the Stars. The main plaza of the capital was packed with 500,000 citizens, all looking up at the floating dais where Councillor Varen stood, bathed in spotlights. The Empress has joined the eternal song, Varen bellowed, his voice amplified to boom across the city. She watches over us, and she demands justice. The Terran menace must be purged. The crowd roared, a sound that was less like a cheer and more like a scream of pain. The screens above showed fleets mobilizing, missiles loading. Suddenly, the screens flickered. Static tore through the image of the Terran fleet. The audio screeched, silencing the crowd. Varen looked around, confused. Technical team, stabilize the feed. But the feed did not stabilize. The image of the fleet dissolved, replaced by a live shot. It was a close-up of a face, Not the wholly airbrushed face of the Ascension posters, but a real face. Sweat-streaked, determined, and blazing with life. "Do not mourn me yet, Varen." Kalira's voice cut through the air, clear and unyielding. "I have not ascended anywhere." A gasp rippled through the crowd, a sound like the ocean drawing back before a tsunami. High above the plaza, on a maintenance gantry overlooking the square, Kalira stepped into the light. She was wearing her traveler's cloak, thrown back to reveal her tactical flight suit. She looked like a warrior, not a deity. "Citizens of the Empire," she shouted, her voice projecting from every speaker in the city. "You are being lied to. There is no Terran invasion. The only enemy is in this palace." Varen's face on the dais twisted from confusion to pure, venomous hatred. He tapped his comms link. "Cut her mic! Shoot her down!" "They can't." Jace's voice came over the speakers next. He was standing beside Kalira, holding a datapad wired into the junction box. "We locked out your control override. And the guards? They're busy watching a dead woman walk." Kalira looked down at the sea of faces. "The Concord of Minds has been poisoning you," she declared. "They are using a machine to twist your thoughts. That anger you feel, that fear, it is not yours, it is the Orion Protocol." The crowd began to murmur. Hands went to heads. People looked at each other. Confusion warring with the programmed rage. The grip of the mind net was slipping. Varen saw it. He saw his carefully constructed coup crumbling. He made a choice. "Activate the protocol," he screamed into his comms. "Full intensity, override mode, make them tear her apart." "Counselor, safety limits," a technician's voice protested. "Burn the limits, do it!" A low, thrumming bass note hit the city. It wasn't sound, it was a psychic shockwave. Jace felt it like a physical blow. His vision blurred. A sudden, irrational spike of panic drove a spike through his skull. Run, fight, kill. But he was human. He was resistant. Kalira was not. She screamed, clutching her head. She dropped to her knees on the gantry. Her bioluminescence flared a blinding, violent white. "Kalira!" Jace dropped the datapad and grabbed her. She looked up at him, but she wasn't there. Her fractal eyes were spinning so fast they were a blur of white noise. Her face was contorted in a snarl. "Traitor!" she hissed, her voice layered with a metallic resonance. "Enemy! Eliminate!" Her hand moved with blurring speed, grabbing Jace by the throat. She possessed strength far beyond a human's. She lifted him off his feet, slamming him against the railing. Below them, the crowd erupted. The confusion was gone, replaced by a mindless, synchronized frenzy. 500,000 people began to scream in unison. They surged toward the palace gates, a tidal wave of flesh and manufactured hate. Jace clawed at Kalira's hand. He couldn't breathe. Her eyes were void of recognition. She was drowning in the mind net, the Orion Protocol overriding her personality with pure aggression. "Kalira," he choked out. "Kill the variable," the protocol commanded through her lips. She raised her other hand, energy gathering in her palm for a lethal strike. Jace didn't fight her grip. He didn't reach for his weapon. Instead, he reached for the bond. It was a chaotic storm of static and fire, but he forced himself into it. He didn't try to block the Orion signal when he didn't try to overpower it. He offered an anchor. He sent a memory, not a tactical plan, not a plea. He sent the memory of her laughing, the image of her in the medical bay, throwing her head back when he made the joke about the artillery officer. The sound of her joy, unscripted and real. Kalira's hand paused. The energy in her palm flickered. Jace pushed harder. He sent the memory of the spicy sauce, the look of surprise on her face, the way she had sat on the bunk, swinging her legs like a girl, not an empress. He sent the feeling of her hand on his face in the outlaw station. The coolness of her skin, the desperation in her voice when she asked if she was real. "You are real," Jace thought, projecting the words directly into the center of the storm. "You are Kaylira. You are the woman who saved me from gravity. Come back." And finally, he sent the moment on the skiff. The moment she had whispered, "Don't just look. You can touch it too." He poured all the love, the desire, and the absolute trust he had for her into that single memory. He used it as a lifeline, wrapping it around her consciousness and pulling. Kaylira gasped. The white light in her eyes shattered, revealing the amethyst and gold underneath. She dropped him. Jace hit the metal grating, gasping for air. Kaylira fell back against the wall, shaking violently. She looked at her hands, then at him. "Jace," she sobbed, the name tearing out of her throat. It tried to make me." "I know," Jace wheezed, rubbing his bruised throat. "I know, but you beat it." "I didn't," she whispered, looking down at the chaotic plaza where the mob was tearing down the statues of her ancestors. "You did." She crawled over to him, grabbing his jacket. "It is too strong. Jace, Varen has removed the safeties. It is not just suggesting anymore. It is driving them insane. If we do not stop it, they will burn the city to the ground just to quiet the noise in their heads." "Then we stop it," Jace said, getting to his feet and pulling her up. "The broadcast towers are locked," she said. "We cannot shut it down remotely." "We don't need remote," Jace said, looking toward the central spire of the palace, the heart of the crystalline beast. "We go to the source. We go to the basement." "The core," Kaylira realized. "If we physically sever the neural trunk, it will cause a feedback loop. A massive psychic backlash." "Will it kill Orion?" Jace asked. "Yes." "Will it kill us?" Kaylira looked at him. The fear was there, but it was different now. It was the fear of a soldier before the charge, not the fear of a victim. "It might," she said honestly, "or it might burn our minds out. We could end up drooling in a corner." "Jace." Jace looked down at the city, at the fires starting to burn in the streets. Then he looked at her. He took her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. "Better to burn out than fade away," he said. Kaylira squeezed his hand, a smile ghosting across her lips, grim, determined, and utterly hers. "That sounds like a human saying," she said. "It is," Jace replied, pulling his pistol. "Let's go show this AI why you don't mess with free will." They turned and ran toward the maintenance lift, leaving the chaos of the sky for the darkness of the deep, hand in hand, ready to break the world to save it. The air grew hotter the deeper they descended, heavy with the smell of ozone and ancient stagnating dust. The polished crystalline aesthetics of the upper palace gave way to the raw, industrial skeleton of the Seraphine Empire. A labyrinth of dark stone, pulsing biocables thick as tree trunks, and machinery that hummed with a sound like a planetary heartbeat. Kaylira led the way, her tactical flight suit torn at the shoulder, her bioluminescence a fierce, unwavering gold in the gloom. Jace Arden was right beside her, his plasma pistol drawn, his eyes scanning the shadows. Behind them, General Torian and his squad of 6 loyalist commandos moved with silent, lethal precision. "We are entering the substrate," Kaylira whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the metallic corridor. "This is where the first emperors communed with the machine. They say the air here is thick with their ghosts." She was right. As they passed banks of flickering server nodes, holographic remnants of long-dead sovereigns sputtered into existence. Distorted faces of light, wearing crowns of wire and code, turned to watch them pass. They whispered in languages that had not been spoken for 1,000 years, their voices bleeding into the low thrum of the Orion Protocol. "Ignore them," Jace said. though the hair on the back of his neck stood up. "They're just echoes." "They are warnings," Kalira murmured. "They are the ones who sold our freedom for safety." They reached the blast doors of the core chamber. The metal was scorched and pitted, but the locking mechanism was active. Kalira placed her hand on the biometric scanner. The machine resisted her, flashing angry red. The Concord had locked her out of her own heart. "Stand back," Torian growled. He signaled his demolition specialist. With a deafening crack, the charges blew the locking bolts. The heavy doors groaned and slid open, revealing the sanctum of the enemy. The core chamber was a cathedral made of light and code. The ceiling vaulted 300 feet high, lost in a swirl of data streams that looked like a digital aurora borealis. In the center of the room stood the core itself, a massive spinning spire of black obsidian suspended in a field of crackling blue energy. Neural conduits radiated from it like the roots of a world tree, burying themselves in the walls to feed the mind net above. Standing at the base of the spire, surrounded by a ring of heavily armed Concord elite guards, was Counselor Varen. He looked small against the backdrop of the machine god, but his presence filled the room. He was not wearing his council robes. He was plugged into the machine, a neural interface cable attached to the base of his skull, his eyes glowing with the same cold, unnatural blue as the core. "I expected you sooner, Kalira," Varen said. His voice didn't just come from his mouth, it boomed from the speakers in the walls, amplified by the system. "You always were impetuous. Step away from the core." "Varen," Kalira commanded, stepping into the light. "It is over. The people know the truth. The people know what I tell them to know," Varen replied smoothly. "Chaos is erupting in the streets, yes. But that is why Orion is necessary. Look at them. Kalira, look at the humans and the Seraphines. Without guidance, they tear each other apart. I am offering them the only peace that lasts. The peace of silence." "Peace at the end of a leash isn't peace," Jace shouted, leveling his weapon. "It's slavery." Varen turned his glowing eyes to Jace. "And you, the Terran variable. You are the chaos element. You corrupted her. She was perfect until you arrived." He gestured, and the Concord guards raised their weapons. Torian's squad instantly took cover behind the databanks, and the room erupted in a storm of plasma fire. "Secure the core," Torian roared, suppressing the guards with a heavy repeater. In the center of the firefight, Varen did not flinch. He looked at Kalira with a twisted, desperate affection. "I did this for you, Majesty, to build a world safe enough for you to rule. Come, merge with Orion. Let go of the fear. Become the goddess they believe you are." He tapped a command into his interface. The core pulsed. A wave of psychic pressure slammed into Kalira, dropping her to her knees. "Kalira!" Jace scrambled toward her, ducking under a volley of laser fire. She didn't hear him. She was no longer in the room. In the mind space, Kalira was floating in a void of perfect, silent white. "Welcome, child," the voice of Orion whispered. It wasn't a mechanical voice. It was a chorus of 1,000 voices, her ancestors, her advisors, her own subconscious desire. A vision bloomed before her. It was the galaxy, but not the messy, dangerous place she knew. It was a clockwork universe of perfect harmony. Planets orbited in synchronized beauty. Fleets moved like dancers, never firing a shot. There was no hunger, no pain, no war, and there was Jace. She saw him standing on a balcony, safe, smiling, unscarred. He was happy. He was safe because she had used her power to remove every threat that could ever hurt him. She had edited the universe to keep him alive forever. "You can save him," Orion promised. "You can save everyone. All you have to do is stop fighting. Take the throne. Take the control. Be the mind that rules. The temptation was a physical weight. It was warm. It was seductive. To never again have to worry about an assassin in the shadows. To never again feel the crushing guilt of a wrong decision. To be infallible. I can save him, Kalira whispered to the void. Her eyes in the physical world began to glow with the cold blue light of the machine. Jace reached her body. He grabbed her shoulders, shaking her. Kalira! Look at me, it's a lie. She stared through him, her expression slack and blissful. I see the path, Jace. It is so quiet. No more pain. No! Jace yelled. He looked at the spinning core, then at the cable connecting Varen. He couldn't shoot the machine. The feedback would scramble her brain. He had to go in. Cover me! Jace shouted to Torian. What are you doing? The general bellowed, firing a grenade at a cluster of conquered guards. I'm going to get her back! Jace dropped his weapon. He grabbed Kalira's face with both hands, pressing his forehead against hers. He didn't have a neural interface. He didn't have Seraphine biology. But he had the bond, the open channel they had forged in the outlaw station. He closed his eyes and threw himself into the abyss. The transition was like falling through a sheet of ice. Jace gasped, his mind reeling as the physical world dissolved into the stark, blinding white of the simulation. He stood on a platform of light. Ahead of him, Kalira stood gazing at the vision of the perfect galaxy. She looked taller, ethereal, her humanity stripped away to reveal a cold, terrifying divinity. Kalira! Jace shouted. The avatar of Orion materialized between them. It took the form of a faceless figure made of starlight, the anomaly. Orion stated, "You do not belong here. Your logic is flawed. You introduce entropy. Get out of my way!" Jace snarled at the AI. He walked toward Kalira. Kalira, listen to me. This isn't real. That Jace you're looking at, the one who is safe, that isn't me. Kalira turned slowly. He is happy. Jace. He never has to fight again. He's a doll, Jace said. Then he's a puppet, just like the citizens outside. Love is preservation, Orion argued, its voice booming like thunder. To love is to protect. I offer the ultimate protection. Why do you resist? The AI waved a hand, and the scenery shifted. Jace saw a new vision. He saw worlds burning. He saw the Terran Alliance and the Seraphine Empire locked in a war of annihilation. He saw Kalira dead in the ruins of her palace. This is the price of your choice, Orion intoned. Free will leads to extinction. Trust leads to betrayal. Look at your own history. Human. You destroy everything you touch. Jace looked at the destruction. It was terrifying, and it was exactly what he had spent 10 years fighting to prevent. But then he looked at Kalira. She was wavering, the fear taking hold of her again. You're right, Jace said to the AI. We do destroy things. We make mistakes. We hurt each other. He stepped through the vision of the burning city, walking until he was standing right in front of Kalira. But that's not all we do, Jace said softly. He projected a memory into the space between them. It wasn't a grand speech. It was a memory from the war, a moment in a muddy trench on Eridanus IV. A Seraphine soldier, wounded and dying, had looked at Jace. Instead of firing, Jace had offered him water. The soldier had taken it. For 10 seconds, they weren't enemies. They were just two dying things comforting each other. Trust isn't a calculation, Kalira, Jace said. It's a gamble. And yeah, you might lose. But if you never bet, you never win anything real. He reached out his hand. Come back to the messy world. Come back to the world where I might die, because that's the only world where I can actually love you. Kalira looked at his hand. Then she looked at the perfect, safe illusion of him. She hesitated. I am afraid to lose you. I know, Jace said. I'm afraid too. But I'd rather lose you to time than lose you to this. Kaylira closed her eyes. The cold blue light of the simulation began to crack. I don't want to be a god, she whispered. Gods are lonely. She reached out and took his hand. The white void shattered. They slammed back into their bodies in the core chamber. The noise of the battle rushed back in, the scream of plasma bolts, the roar of the machine. Kaylira gasped, her eyes snapping back to their natural violet fractal swirl. She looked at Jace, sweat dripping down her face. You came for me. Always, Jace said, helping her stand. Across the room, Varen screamed. The rejection of the simulation had caused a feedback spike. He clutched his head, blood running from his nose. No! You cannot reject perfection. It is illogical. It is human, Kaylira shouted back. She looked at the spinning core. Jace, the lock is broken, but the code is still running and we have to overload it. How? Together, she said. We have to become a dual key. We have to force more data into the core than it can process. We have to give it everything. Everything, Jace asked. Every memory, every fear, every secret. Total transparency, Kaylira said, gripping his hand tight. It will hurt. Do it, Jace said. They turned to the core. Kaylira raised her free hand, and Jace raised his. They didn't need a cable. They used the raw power of their combined wills, amplified by Kaylira's royal biometric resonance. They opened the floodgates. It wasn't like the gentle connection on the skiff. This was a fire hose. Jace felt Kaylira's entire life crash into him. He felt the coldness of her childhood, raised by tutors who feared her. He felt the shame of her privilege. He felt the secret. Burning jealousy she felt when she saw commoners holding hands. He felt her terrifying intelligence, her capacity for violence, and her deep, crippling insecurity that she was unlovable. And she felt him. She felt the blood on his hands. She felt the night he almost put his service pistol in his mouth because the silence was too loud. She felt his lust for her, raw and unpolished. She felt his pettiness, his anger, his cowardice. There was nowhere to hide. They were spiritually naked, stripped of every lie they told themselves. It was agonizing. To be fully known is to be fully vulnerable. But in that shared space of total exposure, they found something else. Acceptance. Jace saw her darkness and didn't look away. Kaylira saw his brokenness and didn't recoil. I see you, Jace thought. I accept you, Kaylira answered. They took that massive, complex, paradoxical knot of human and alien emotion, the reality that love and fear can coexist, and they shoved it into the Orion core. The AI shrieked. Error. Data corruption. Illogical variance. Emotion cannot be quantified. The core spun faster, glowing violently bright. The blue light turned to a blinding white, then to a dangerous, unstable violet, in a last-ditch effort to save itself. Orion lashed out. Visions assaulted them. Jace dying in her arms, his chest torn open. Kaylira standing on a mountain of skulls, laughing, Terra burning, the Empire rotting. Look at it, Orion screamed in their minds. This is your future. Maybe. Kaylira shouted, her voice merging with Jace's in a psychic harmony. But it will be our future. We choose the risk. We choose the pain, Jace roared. They squeezed their hands together until the bones creaked. They embraced the terror of the unknown. They accepted that things could go wrong, and they chose to move forward anyway. That acceptance was the poison pill. Orion was built on the logic of control. It could not process a command structure based on the acceptance of chaos. System failure. Logic loop detected. Critical overload. The obsidian spire cracked. A fissure of light ran down the center of the monolith. Varen shrieked as the feedback fried his neural interface. The cable detached from his skull with a hiss of steam, and he collapsed, unconscious. "Hold on!" Jace yelled, pulling Kalira into his chest as the room began to shake. The core detonated. It wasn't an explosion of fire, and it was a shockwave of silence. A massive, invisible pulse that rippled out from the palace, through the city, up into the atmosphere, and out to the fleet. The mind net snapped. The heavy, oppressive blanket that had smothered the Empire for centuries evaporated in an instant. Jace and Kalira were thrown backward by the force of the psychic break. They hit the floor hard, their hands ripped apart by the impact. The world went black. Silence. Then, a groan. Jace opened his eyes. The ceiling of the cathedral was still there, but the data streams were gone. The core was a smoking ruin of slagged rock. The blue light was dead. He rolled over, coughing. Kalira? She was lying a few feet away, her flight suit covered in dust. She wasn't moving. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced his chest. He crawled over to her, his body screaming in protest. "Kay, wake up!" He touched her face. Her skin was cool. Her bioluminescence was dim, barely a flicker. "Don't you dare," he whispered, pressing his fingers to her neck. "Don't you dare leave me here alone." A pulse, weak, erratic, but there. Her eyelids fluttered. The fractals in her eyes were slow, lazy swirls of gray, slowly returning to violet. She took a ragged breath and focused on him. "Did we?" she rasped, her voice a wreck. "Did we break it?" "We broke it," Jace said, resting his forehead against hers, laughing through a sob. "We broke it all." "Good," she whispered. "I have a headache." Above them, through the ventilation shafts, a strange sound drifted down from the city. It wasn't the roar of a mob. It wasn't the silence of obedience. It was the chaotic, messy, beautiful sound of 1,000,000 people waking up and asking, "What just happened?" It was the sound of confusion, the sound of freedom. 3 weeks later, the Grand Plaza was full again, but the mood was different. The screens were dark. The propaganda was gone. The people stood not in formation, but in loose, shifting crowds. Terran shuttles were docked on the landing pads, and human aid workers moved among the Seraphines, distributing supplies. Kalira stood on the main balcony of the palace. She wore no crown. She wore a simple gown of unadorned white silk. She stepped to the microphone. She didn't look like a goddess. She looked like a woman who hadn't slept enough. "My people," she began, her voice steady, "and our guests from Terra." She didn't read from a script. She told them the truth. She told them about Orion. She told them about the mind net. She told them about her own complicity, her own blindness. She apologized. "I cannot promise you safety anymore," she said, her voice echoing across the silent city. "I cannot promise you that the future will be easy. The walls are down, the guidance is gone, we are free, and freedom is terrifying." She looked over the crowd, and for the first time she saw them looking back not with worship, but with judgment, with curiosity, with skepticism. "I do not ask you to follow me," Kalira said. "I ask you to walk with me. We will build a new council, one of voices, not of echoes. We will make mistakes, but they will be our mistakes." She stepped back. The applause didn't start instantly. It started slowly. A few hands, then more. It wasn't the thunderous, programmed ovation of the past. It was ragged. It was real. It was earned. Jace watched from the shadows of the balcony entrance. He wore a fresh uniform, the rank insignia of a full ambassador on his collar. General Torian stood beside him. She has guts. Your Terran lover. The general grunted. She's not a Terran lover, General, Jace corrected softly. She's just an Empress who learned how to be human. Torian snorted, but there was respect in his eyes. Kalira turned from the railing and walked back into the palace. She saw Jace and stopped. The exhaustion on her face melted away for a second, replaced by a warm, private light. She walked past the general, past her aides, and stopped in front of Jace. She didn't care about the cameras. She reached out and took his hand. "Ready for the boring part?" she asked. "Treaties? Trade routes? Grain tariffs?" "I live for grain tariffs," Jace smiled. "As long as you're the one signing them." Epilogue. The stars outside the viewport of the diplomatic cruiser Unity were different here. They were the stars of the borderlands, the space where the Terran and Seraphine territories now overlapped in a messy patchwork of joint colonies. Jace Arden stood looking out at the nebula, a glass of synthetic scotch in his hand. The ship was quiet, the delegation asleep. He heard the soft hiss of the door, then the familiar rhythmic step of bare feet on the deck plating. Kalira joined him at the window. She was wearing a loose robe, her hair unbound, floating slightly in the microstatic field of the ship. Her skin glowed with a contented soft blue light that reflected in the glass, mixing with the starlight. "You should be sleeping," Jace said, not turning to look at her, though he could see her reflection. "You have a summit with the Prime Minister in 6 hours. "The Prime Minister talks too much," Kalira murmured, leaning against his shoulder. "I prefer the quiet." They stood in silence for a long time, watching the galaxy turn. It was a dangerous galaxy. There were still factions who hated the peace. There were still pirates. There were still arguments. But it was free. Jace turned his head slightly to look at her. He traced the line of her jaw, the way the bioluminescence danced along her neck, the impossible depth of her fractal eyes which were currently fixed on a distant cluster of stars. He watched her. He memorized her. He drank in the sight of her like a man dying of thirst. Kalira felt his gaze. She didn't turn immediately. She let a small, knowing smile play on her lips. She arched one elegant silver eyebrow. "You are doing it again, Ambassador," she said, her voice a low hum. Jace chuckled, taking a sip of his drink. "Doing what? I'm just appreciating the Empress's contribution to interstellar harmony. It's my job." Kalira turned to him then. She stepped closer, closing the small gap between them. Her scent, ozone and orchids, filled his senses. The playfulness in her eyes darkened into something deeper, something that remembered the cold of the void and the heat of the core. She reached up, her fingers grazing the lapel of his jacket, then moving up to rest on his chest, right over his heart. "Stop staring," she whispered, her voice echoing the first night they had truly met. But this time, there was no fear, only promise. She smirked, that same wicked, beautiful expression that had saved his life. "You know you don't have to just look." Jace didn't hesitate. He set the glass down on the ledge. "I know," he said. He closed the distance. His hands found her waist, pulling her flush against him. Her arms went around his neck, her skin cool and electric against his. When he kissed her, it wasn't a collision of empires. It was just a man and a woman, standing in the light of a billion stars, choosing each other. Outside, the galaxy spun on, chaotic, unpredictable, and beautiful, just like them.